Hello, everybody. This is Global Warming Skeptic, and we need to have a talk. A big talk, because I'm scared for my country. I am terrified. And I don't think it's necessarily anybody meaning to be deceitful. It is just the wheels of history are clicking around once again, and it's starting to fall where our country was once thought to be immune. We are very vulnerable to something big. We need to have a talk about Bernie Sanders. And let's just be direct, he would be an awful choice for this country. A very awful choice. Now, I'm not saying this to say Bernie Sanders is a bad guy, has bad character, or does not mean well. But it's important to note that Bernie Sanders, probably through no intention, his policies and his ideas are based on misinformed propaganda, and it will tear this country apart. Now, I don't dislike Bernie Sanders as a person. As you can see in the notes here, he has very humble origins. He was born to poor Jewish immigrants. He rose up a lot through himself. And he's very honest and passionate. When you hear him speak, you know for a fact that he at least believes what he's saying. He's not saying something motivated by money, probably not motivated by power, although that's possible. We'll get into that. And he's not motivated by lobbyists, even though he does receive substantial amounts of money from donations. It's not, I don't believe that these are motivating his positions. I believe that he believes in all of what he is saying, and he has strong personal character. If you listen to him speak to Congress, you listen to him speak to his opponents, even in the face of heated debate, he will not strongly attack people's personal character. Now, he may attack an ideology, such as very heavily attacking Republican ideology, but what he said about Hillary Clinton, whether you believe she did wrong or not, I believe she did wrong. She needs to go to jail for what she did, particularly at Benghazi, but that's another debate entirely. But he stood up for her when he had no obligation to do so. And to me, whether you agree with him or not, that is a sign of very strong personal character. Bernie Sanders, as far as I can tell, is a very good man with a good heart. So you may be asking, what's wrong with Bernie Sanders? If all these things are true, why would he not make a good president? It's important to know you have to think of the presidency as more than just a feel-good person. These are people applying for jobs. They have to have integrity, and they also have to be dependable. And this is where Bernie Sanders falls short. No executive experience, first of all, and no education to go with it. I didn't write that here, but that's true. His education is a 4-year degree from the University of Chicago in political science. He has no formal education in any other area. He was a carpenter by profession, before he got into politics. The closest thing that he has to executive experience is the mayor of a little town called Burlington, Vermont, which is a very wealthy town. Burlington Coat Factory, that's where they come from. Very wealthy town. And yeah, so not a town that necessarily represents the American worker. And which gets into the other thing is that he's never represented the American worker. Vermont is full of two types of people: the very wealthy and the very poor who are on drugs, heroin to be specific. And not only that, but he represents the second fewest people of anybody in the United States. Vermont has a very small, mostly well-to-do population. So he's never really seen the plight of the American worker or where it's come from. And just for some extra context on that, I was born just south of Detroit. I've personally seen the squatters, the houses that are boarded up with the overgrown yards, fences everywhere, trying to keep the rampant crime away. I don't just talk about it, I've seen this. It's a very horrible sight, and this is all due to the collapse of manufacturing. So, we're not going to get too far into that yet. This is just a summary. He's misinformed about the issues, particularly climate change and tax policy. He claims that there is a scientific consensus on climate change. There is not. For more on that, you could see my videos on climate change. I have several of them, but I will be doing one within the context of the words of Bernie Sanders. More on that at the end of this video. And with tax policy, basically saying the very misinformed statement that we can give people debt-free, tuition-free college for free, and we could do it by raising taxes. And this shows a very basic fundamental misunderstanding of economics. Again, we will get into that specific issue in another video. This is just a summary, and he is wrong about tax policy, education policy, healthcare policy, all these policies, and we're going to get into the specific numbers. I'll be showing you peer-reviewed literature, reputable sources, and if you ask me in the comments, I will provide you with those sources ahead of time as well. But either way, I will be providing context on that in another talk similar to this one. He's still a politician, and that's what seems to get lost in this. Bernie Sanders receives a lot of money in personal donations. He's not a big super PAC person, but neither is any Democrat. Democrats get their funding from a lot of large donations from individuals. From corporate individuals, might I add. Bernie Sanders is not a lot different. He gets, from 2009 to 2014, he received, I think it was 2.6 million. Again, you can look at my other video on Bernie Sanders that I posted a couple months ago that gets into these numbers in detail. It's from opensecrets.org. You can just type in Bernie Sanders and collect the numbers for yourself. But what I'm saying here is this. Ultimately, a lot of what he's saying, he means what he's saying, but in his confirmation bias and just in his words, he's saying things to get elected, folks. Which means he's not looking at the other side as much as he should. And maybe that's no fault of his own. Maybe that's just a psychological thing. Because I think if he knew the truth and he were open to it, I do believe that he would change his mind if he found out. But see, there's the problem, and that's the next two things on this list: is complete absence of leadership skills. Nobody even knew who Bernie Sanders was until we just decided he was running for office. And to an extent, that includes members of Congress. And let me just pull up something briefly to show you guys. We're going to look at his Gov track record, and his leadership score is pretty far below average, and it's extremely partisan. Bernie Sanders Gov track. You could look up a lot of people on this. This is pretty interesting. So we're going to look up this. Here's Bernie Sanders. You scroll down here a little bit, and see, you could look up even former people like Hillary Clinton. They'll be listed on this graphic right here. And of course, the up-down scale is the leadership score, which is based on the number of co-sponsors to his bills, and the ideology score is the number of co-sponsors from the opposing party. Now, as you can see, Bernie Sanders is below average and as far to the left of it as it goes, which means he's very far to the left, and he's not even seen as a leader in his own party. He has no leadership skills. He cannot persuade the other party to vote with him. If you look at the number of bills he's passed, I think we can look at that too. Let's see if we can find that real quick without too much trouble. Okay. Let's see. Sanders official. I forgot how you look at this. Let's see. It's been a while since I've done this. Well, yeah, I'm not going to waste too much time on that. But basically, what I'm just saying is he's only passed a couple of bills, 3 bills, I believe, in the past at least 13 years since GovTrack kept track of him. 2 of those bills were renaming post offices in Vermont, and one of them was a veteran, a VA bill that McCain sponsored, and Bernie Sanders was simply a co-sponsor. Granted, it passed, so you got to give it to him. You got to give him the good with the bad, but the important thing is he's not exactly inspiring people in Congress. And this is going to be a problem, because if you look at what's happened under Obama, whether you like Obama or not, I don't like Obama, but he was the same thing. Extremely popular with the people when he got elected twice, but the one thing he could not do was convince Congress to go along with his plan. See, it doesn't matter if you're a socialist or not, because at the end of the day, you have to get people to rally behind you, and when your leadership skills are so bad that you get political points from the general public for standing against the president, such as Congress has done with Obama, then you're not going to get very far, and it may lead to 4 to 8 years of ineptitude. And not only is there a complete absence of leadership, even worse is a complete lack of compromise. So, without leadership skills, you need to compromise, because that's your only weapon, basically, is the weapon of compromise, and he's not compromising. His views are so far to the left, just as you saw with govtrack.org, that it's he does not compromise with Republicans. He does not talk to Republicans. He does not see things from a conservative point of view. And that's going to hurt him. And his military solutions continue Obama's inept policy of sanctions and isolation, neither of which has worked. What does Obama do to Putin? Sanctions him. So, what happens? Well, the Russian people start rallying around Putin, and public opinion of the United States plummets. It's basically Cuba all over again. In Cuba, the same thing happened. In Cuba, we had very high public support at one time, in the Kennedy years. But when we put the embargo on them, public opinion plummeted. It soared for Castro, and Castro went on to outlive every single U.S. president in history. So it's like this does not work. You have to, it doesn't mean you have to go to war, but you have to do more than simple sanctions. You have to get in their face, and you have to start forcing things. When he goes into Syria and says he's going to dictate the terms of what Syria is, you stand your ground. You don't say, okay, we're going to let you handle Syria. Which, by the way, Syria is one thing where I don't mind Putin getting involved, but I'm just saying as an example, wherever Putin goes to put his influence, you get in his face and you contest him. You don't let him feel like he can have his influence. And when he realizes that it's only through you that he could get things done, he's going to be more open to listening. And so, you don't just say, we're going to sanction you and then we're just going to leave it at that. No, you contest him in Crimea. You put troops in Ukraine and you say, no, you're not invading Ukraine. You invade Ukraine, you are invading a U.S. interest, and we're not allowing you to do that. It doesn't even matter if it makes sense in an international sense. If we have troops stationed there and Ukraine approves of those troops being there, then there's no trumped up referendum followed by annexation. And so, it's Bernie Sanders is just like, I don't know, it's been terrible. It's been terrible under Obama, and it really scares me under Sanders, because what you've had under Obama is a policy on Syria where we are both funding Syrian rebels and Syria at the same time, supporting Assad fighting ISIS, while supporting ISIS fighting Assad. We have to fight against our own weapons that we arm the rebels with. And so, what ends up happening is that we just waste our time. When Putin came in and did the bombing, he did a lot more damage to ISIS than we've done in weeks. And I'll tell you what that's attributed to. It's not that Putin has a better military. No. He has a good relationship with Assad, and they're going to share mutual intelligence because they have a military pact together, a mutual defense pact, and that's how that goes, is because he's taking a side in this, he gets intelligence that would not otherwise be available. And see, that's the problem, is that Obama refuses to take a side. He's trying to fight two people at once. But anyhow, enough about that. Basically, the point is, Bernie Sanders would not be very good with our military. He may be good to our veterans. Our veterans do need help, love, and care. And I do think he'd do good by them, but not much else. And I think there's more to be said about this final point than anything, and this is going to be going into far more detail in another video. His words repeat what's happened throughout history, and this is the most scary thing, because if you look throughout history, the rise of Castro, the rise of Mao Zedong, the rise of North Korea, USSR, all these socialist regimes, and even what's happening in the current socialist regimes, or the ones that are turning socialist. It's not a good sign, people. You had Vladimir Lenin with the October Revolution in Russia in, what was it, 1918 or something? I don't know the exact date, but the point is, it was the same type of thing. You had the poor of Russia fighting to overthrow the czars and the aristocracy, and they wanted equality. They wanted equality of wealth. They wanted the wealth shared because they were tired of being down. And it's a good point, and it's a legit point, and that's the problem, is the grievances are not wrong. What's wrong is the proposed solution and the idea that a socialist regime is going to make things better for the poor. But you look everywhere around the world, and it breaks down. What you end up getting is not the elimination of the elite. What you get are hand-picked elites from the government, mainly the academic sector, the scientists, which in every communist and socialist regime get paid much more than the average person, despite the idea that everyone's supposed to be paid the same. And not only do you not do better, but you lose your freedoms. That's just what happens. And you have to lose your freedoms, because that's the only way these things get enforced. Just look at a country like Sweden. Sweden was very much known before for its neutrality, the ease of doing business there. It was a place that other countries could go to seek asylum as a mediator of sorts, and just they could always depend on Sweden for trade and for help. But that's breaking down in Sweden. You're having people arrested merely for expressing their opinions on their government in terms of the migration of Muslims into their country, and opinions on homosexuality expressed within a church. And it is happening the exact same way it happened in the USSR. And that is the slow erosion of what were well-intended freedoms. And when Vladimir Lenin took office, he was very well-intentioned. He did not have the same radical ambitions as Joseph Stalin. Vladimir Lenin was a very legitimate person who believed strongly that he was right, but he truly was for answering the plight of the worker. And I don't think he understood that it was going to fail, and that he was set up for failure from the beginning, but he was well-intentioned, and so they set up a constitution for religious freedom. What ended up happening was you had eventually executions and people sent to death camps over public religious displays which more and more became restricted, to the point where only a handful of Orthodox churches were allowed to remain, and people could not practice their religion outside of those Orthodox churches. And that's what we're facing. That's what Sweden's facing. Is they're facing the imprisonment of the religious for expressing their religion, disguised as hate speech. It's not looking good with Bernie Sanders. I don't think people understand that we don't want to go there. This isn't where we want to go. And even if this is where Sweden wants to go, and you guys are Americans, most of you watching this are Americans, you're going to know what I'm talking about, is we enjoy a lot of freedoms with a lot of disposable income, a lot of choice in terms of where we live, where we work, how we live, what kind of house we live in, what our household arrangements are, what kind of food we eat, how much we eat, how much we drink, what we eat, what we drink. We have so much control over our lives beyond what most other countries have. And yes, there are issues with corruption in this country. There's issues with corruption in every country. But the point is, we in this country enjoy so many freedoms, and I think especially young people, and I was one of those too, you take that freedom for granted. And when you lose that freedom, you don't get the chance to get it back, because the mere idea of speaking out against it will be considered treasonous, and you will have no freedom but except for to speak against your own freedom. It is a very slippery slope, and that can get out of control. Now, to conclude, I'm going to be doing more Bernie Sanders videos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go issue through issue, give you the general numbers. We're going to be using a lot of varied sources: World Health Organization, U.S. Census Bureau. We're going to be looking at poverty. We're going to be looking at economic models. We're going to be looking at peer-reviewed literature on climate change. I'm not going to talk out of my ass. I promise you that what I'm going to provide, and this has been provided in other videos, I'm going to provide you with reputable sources and as good of logic as I can give you, and more importantly, my local presence. I'll be able to answer your questions a lot easier than a lot of other people will, because I want you to be informed too. I don't want, and hell, if there's something you can teach me, if you could show me that what you're saying is right, I will switch to your side. I promise you that. I'm an informed person, but I'm not inflexible. But you have to show me, and more importantly, I'm going to show you, because I have a lot of reputable sources. We're going to be deconstructing Bernie Sanders and why you cannot vote for him if you want this country to improve. It's not what it seems to be. He speaks passionately, but he is wrong, and you're going to find out why he is wrong in the videos that follow this one. Thank you guys for listening very much. God bless, and have a good night.